Hello. I'm glad, we're both glad, I think, to be in this beautiful room with that special haze to present to you kind of an external edition of a series which has been going on at the Hau Theater for almost 10 years now, called Plattenspieler, where I'm always sitting with somebody from music or other arts and talking about music and listening to records, watching the sleeves, and it's like playing cards in a way. And I'm very glad to have Gilles Peterson here tonight, or this afternoon. Who's been a very important figure in popular music in the last 3 or 4 decades, coining musical styles, triggering musical styles, running labels, doing live evenings, club nights, doing radio. And I'm a novelist, musician, and DJ, and also been doing radio a lot since almost like the same time we seem to have been starting. Talking about starting, we should start with a record that Gilles brought and which he wants to play here. And then I'll answer with one of my records I brought.
Okay, great. Hello. So I thought we could start off with a record that was relevant because we're in Germany, and it also is a kind of starting point for me in discovering new music out of my sort of comfort zone in a way. My grandmother used to own a hotel in Normandy in France. I was born in France, and I moved to London when I was a few years old. But my grandmother had this hotel, so my parents used to send me over there just to get me away from the smoke, just to give me a little bit of clarity. And they'd just get rid of me for a few weeks every year, maybe a couple of months if I was really unfortunate. And it was in the middle of the countryside in Normandy, and and there was nothing in this village, just one hotel, one bar, and a couple of bakeries, you know, that kind of thing. And but because my grandmother ran this hotel, every week she'd go to the nearest town, which is a town called Caen, which is 40 kilometers away, and she used to drive there very slowly. And we'd eventually get to this town, and she'd go and do the shopping, and then she'd let me free for a little while with maybe 10 francs in my hand. And so I'd go to the record shop, and I was about 13, 12 or 13 then. And I'd go in the record shop, and I wouldn't know what I was doing really. I just thought that was a cool place to go to and go through the records. And one of the first records I ever bought was a record which came out on a German label called MPS, which, weirdly enough, is a label that you don't see in that many countries, but you see MPS everywhere in Brazil. For some odd reason, when you go to Brazil...
They did Baden Powell a lot?
Maybe they did Baden Powell.
Yeah.
And so you always see MPS records there, and you see random MPS records in France. And this record was by an artist called George Duke. And this record was just one of those records that I think really resonated with me, and was one of the sort of key records in introducing me to jazz. And it's a record that still sounds good today, so I thought I'd play that.
It's a funny label which was run out of the Black Forest, a very remote hillbilly location, and they put out a lot of jazz and other strange stuff, also easy listening in a way, but also Brazilian music. Yeah.
So actually, are these your glasses?
My glasses, but maybe we have the same amount already. I don't know. You can use them.
I hope we have the same level of...
It's 1.5.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. It could have gone the other way, right? But it was the right way. This is a long song, but we'll play a couple of minutes of it. And by the way, this is a reissued copy, which MPS Records have just been reactivating the label. MPS Records was a label based in the Black Forest, and I'd say it's probably certainly the biggest catalogue of sort of legacy jazz and German jazz that probably exists in Germany. And strangely enough, they signed a few American artists, including George Duke.
And George Russell, and really interesting, Claire Fisher. Yeah. What is this, early 70s or mid 70s?
Yeah, it's mid-70s, I think. It must
Yeah.
be 76, something like that. 78.
78, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have been, yeah, exactly. It was a new release. I would have been 14.
What do you think? Is it fusion jazz? What do you
Jazz,
listen?
well, the thing for me, so first of all, I picked this record up for nothing.
Yeah.
I bought 3 records that day. I bought a record called Percussion Brésilienne on Les Chants du Monde, which is a drumming record, which I still play today.
Yeah.
Amazing, sometimes. I bought a record by a French violinist called Didier Lockwood.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a kind of slightly less good version of Jean-Luc Ponty, although debatable.
Yeah,
And I got a little bit of play on my, but what I did, obviously, I took these 3 records back to the hotel, and I had a little bedroom there, and there was a record player. And this record here, I must have listened to it like 1,000 times, because
Yeah.
that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
On and on and on. And what I loved about it was that it had that kind of Brazilian feeling, and I loved the sort of the chant and the vocals. So Airto's on there, Flora Purim's on there, and it kind of introduced me to this sort of new area for me, which was this kind of Brazilian. It kind of entered Brazilian music into my language.
We should listen to some Brazilian records later too. Maybe.
Sure.
Do you have some with you? Maybe one.
I've always got a couple.
Oh, good.
Always a couple in the bag.
Yeah, since you were running really important labels, I brought a record with me by Digo, who was an 4Hero, and he brought. Do you know this already? It's quite a new one. You
Sure.
have it, of course. Yeah. I only have it since a week.
Okay.
It came out on Theo Parrish's Sound Signature label, and Digo and Kaidi. How do you pronounce him? Kaidi Tatum. He's an American who lives in England, I
No,
think.
he's an Englishman who lives in Belfast.
Oh, so kind of.
Yeah.
Kind
With
of.
Caribbean descent.
Yeah, I knew there was something like. I thought he's really doing something like deep house to me, and I really like him also on his own.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great collaboration of those two. And it's jazz. Nowadays you can just say it's jazz. You don't even have to think about, like you would have taught with George Duke, this is fusion jazz or something. If we listen to it now, it's just jazz, I think. And some of it we wouldn't call jazz anymore.
Right.
Also, you know,
Yeah.
like
Dangerous word.
dangerous word anyway.
It's a
But
dangerous
I like to have the idea of jazz in music, which is not normally being labeled as jazz all the time. And for instance, Theo Parrish's music is something like that. I'd like to hear this on jazz festivals, you know, programmed jazz as well. You can be in a jazz relation to yourself in your computer, in a way.
Yeah.
And so I thought this is a nice record in that, in this field, and we can just listen a little to it, but you know it anyway. And do you like it?
It depends which one you play off this EP.
I will play this with the vocals.
Okay.
You wanted something else to
Well,
be
no,
played?
no, play that one, but the one that I play out is Treasure Beach.
Oh, that's the funny thing. Because of the weight of my luggage on the plane, I only took the second record with me.
Oh, it's a double vinyl,
Because I have to do this tomorrow again, and there's only 23 kilos.
Okay.
Sorry, wrong. Yeah, anyway. Definitely bass culture.
Yeah.
Sorry about this, but this is going for another 5 or 6 minutes, and we do have not too much time. But I think this makes sense in a way. It could have been on MPS if they would still be putting out new music.
Well, you mentioned, we just said the jazz word a moment ago, and as we were listening to that, I was thinking, in a way, what is jazz, or what makes a jazz musician? For me, it's kind of the pioneers that can kind of get that word put next to them with confidence. So for me, Digo's a pioneer. Kaidi's a pioneer. Theo Parrish is a pioneer. So the word jazz is relevant to them because when they started making music, they were making music that nobody else had quite made.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think they really, that word works for them. I mean, Digo, this sound is a progression in a way of a mini movement that happened in London on the back of sort of drum and bass.
Yeah.
So what I love about being and doing what I do in London is that London is very good at reinventing itself in terms of music and fashion. And whether it's punk or rave or drum and bass, jungle, grime, there's always something new happening in London. And one of the little subcultures that was very exciting, which sadly didn't really grow But it did because it had a huge influence with producers, but was the broken beat scene.
Yeah.
And in fact, here in Germany, I think that Jazz and Over Sonar Collective, there's a mini scene that was influenced by that over there as well, and it was a very interesting time. And in that sense, I think that this represents a sort of return to that sound. The fact that there's a whole new generation of people who are getting it and want it, and it's actually one of those types of music that whenever I was playing as a DJ in America to a black audience, it was always the music that they wanted and that they responded to the most on the dance floor. So it's something that I think we're all very proud of in the UK as a movement. And it's great in a way that they've teamed up with Theo, because there's always been a sort of similar DIY aesthetic with regards to all of those guys doing it themselves. I mean, I signed For Hero to Talking Loud.
I know, that's why I put it on.
A few years ago, and weirdly enough, Digo was it was really weird because running a record label, especially in those days when you had to, when I was going for a major record label, so I'd have my boutique label, Talking Loud, and it was going for Universal Phonogram at the time, Polygram, and I'd release these records in the UK, but then for them to become a kind of profitable thing, you needed to sell records abroad. And so I'd basically travel around as a DJ, but I'd also sort of double up with my new releases and go and visit the record companies, or the record company that I was working with, and sometimes I'd come with the artist just to sort of do a selling job, because it's all about, you know, so, to the marketing department who would then hopefully sell it to the salespeople. And I remember Digo, I brought him over, and he was the least sociable person. You know, he's the funniest guy in the world, but if you put him around a table with people for dinner, people that he's meant to be schmoozing and you know, playing along with, he was the guy who was like literally over dinner was like this. And literally would not talk to anyone, and so everyone just thought. He was. All I'm saying is he was very hard work when it came to selling his music. But his music that he was making with Mark Mac at the time, where we released 2 of their albums. You know, I'm very proud of those records. And in a way, the record that I can switch over to is a record that I think inspired the broken beat movement to a degree, one of the big influences. And interestingly enough, I do a radio station in London called Worldwide FM, which I launched a year ago, and I do live broadcasts from my basement every Thursday or Friday. And yesterday, I interviewed an artist called Leroy Burgess. And Leroy Burgess was in a band called Black Ivory, and he was a really influential guy, and his sound and aesthetic for music was a big influence. It's kind of like boogie, and not boogie.
Disco as well?
Yeah,
like disco after disco, or after the disco demolition.
A little bit, yeah. It's kind of like where disco met those super funk groups, but with a really minimal pre-dance floor feeling of building a song for the dance. And so Leroy Burgess was one person who was a huge influence to these guys, whether it was in his band's Universal Robot Band or Black Ivory.
Around 1980, or when?
Well, I mean, Leroy Burgess, I mean, Black Ivory's first record was 1973, so that would have been sort of the back of the sort of, that was more of a Temptations, you know, stringy vibe. But then when he started making those disco records, it would have been from sort of 1978, I think, you know, that time. But the group, which, funnily enough, when I was speaking to Leroy Burgess yesterday in the interview that I conducted, he told me that Larry Blackman of Cameo used to play with Black Ivory. And that made a real connection for me, because I always felt that they were all in the same spirit. So this is a record from Cameo, which we all used to play a lot, and I'd say this is a real foundation for the broken beat movement.
Nice. So, but this was now late 70s, I guess.
Yeah, I
Or-
think.
yeah,
I
not-
think.
not
Yeah,
so
I think
important.
it's still. Yeah, 81. 81.
81.
Yeah, 81. So this was.
Yeah.
To me, this is pirate radio in London. It's the precursor to Broken Beat. It's music
Yeah.
that people went out to dance to. It's a unique British phenomenon, I think, about funk. You know, you'd go to clubs, Crackers, you'd go to Electric Ballroom, and this was where people would dance off.
Yeah, yeah.
The records were critical, and they weren't records that were big in America or anywhere else in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
as a DJ, I'd come to Germany. Early days, probably mid-80s, I started coming to Germany as a DJ, but the funk relationship was different to the funk relationship in the UK. Yes, James
Yeah.
Brown was the one in the middle that touched it all, but Germany was always more Johnny Guitar Watson.
Yeah.
For me, as a DJ, if you played Johnny Guitar Watson,
If you were,
they'd
if
love
you
it.
were in the American sector, but there was always also the British sector, with a different. I grew up in Hamburg, totally different funk scene than in Frankfurt, for instance. It's interesting because of the different zones.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
had you had BFBS radio or AFN radio with different influences on the people as well, which was interesting.
Yeah.
It still keeps kind of being there in the back of the heads. I put on a record from Nigeria from 1981, which does have some disco. I mean, it starts with a hilarious. I just give you a minute of this hilarious. Maybe it was the hit. It's like "It's So Easy to Fall in Love," being recorded in Nigeria, but just for a minute, because that's not what I want to play. It's not nice. And so on. But there's a good kind of disco-ish track on it, which I wanted to play to you. I mean, it's of course Nigerian music, but no, it's not disco at all. I'm sorry,
Well,
it was
no,
a mistake.
but- no,
It's
no.
just the way of producing it in a way. The drums and the kind of synthetic sounding drums or whatever made me think of this was done when there was disco kind of worldwide, but it's
Yeah.
still, of course, it's just the great music from Nigeria.
I mean, you can play that at the dance. I think.
Yeah.
I think that tastes and moods change, and a record like that right now you can drop it because there's been so much great work in the last few years. I think for me, when I first was introduced to African music, again, at those clubs that we were talking about earlier on, you'd hear Fela. You'd hear Fela Kuti, you'd hear maybe Manu Dibango.
Yeah.
You hear those kind of, the big staple names, Fela particularly. And I thought that was pretty much what it was, right? I was very short-sighted in my view of sort of the music of Africa. And I went to Lagos a few years ago and did some work with Seun and Femi. And I kind of went to a few record shops and just saw like so much music there, which was in terrible condition, by the way. Very hard to find records in Africa that are in great condition. It's a bit like going to Cuba for the quality of records. But nowadays, you've got the equipment to kind of clean it up, I think, pretty much. But anyway, to me, that opened a door. It was like, well, there's actually a lot more. And you're a bit narrow-minded in your thinking. And I think in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, particularly, whether it's labels like Analog Africa or Soundway.
Or Awesome Tapes from Africa,
Awesome
for
Tapes,
instance.
Amazing record label. And those guys, what they've done is that they've gone so deep in curating, collecting, discovering, unearthing all this music and contextualizing it for a club culture, for a dance floor culture. And so when you get people like Dan Snaith from Caribou or people like Fortet dropping these records mid-set at Sonar, the whole crowd is like being introduced to this new music. And suddenly your feeling, your sense of it changes. And you hear it in a new way. And I think that, for example, even like the William Onyebo records that came out a couple of years ago on Nuoka Bop, they've made this music, number one, very cool. And number two, super, and it's a refreshing mood that enters the dance floor.
And the funny thing is, you said about recontextualizing it, there had already been the context of club music and everything in Africa and the different states in Africa anyway, but we didn't want to know that, There was all this so-called world music in England and Germany, meant it had to be bamboo, and no drum machines. And now we have these great labels like Awesome Tapes from Africa, who specialize in putting cassette productions from the 80s or 90s or even 70s on heavy vinyl for nerds like me to be able to get into what else there had always been, And we just didn't just rely to, or didn't fit into our concept of how third world music should be like. Well, so that was already there, but we were cut off in a way.
Yeah. And I think also with Awesome Tapes, they've done something exceptional as well. Apart from just putting out these amazing pieces of music, they've also discovered artists that weren't successful at the time. People like Atakak, who basically the guys from there, they found a cassette of his in some car.
Even done in Germany.
Sorry?
It was even done somewhere in Germany.
Was it
he was kind of lost in Germany and did this great cassette production.
And then they found him because he'd done this homemade cassette, and they've turned him into a kind of festival star now. So he's now traveling around the world. And what I like about this record, by the way, is that you picked it up from Flashback Records. Look at this sticker here. Flashback Records, Essex Road. A very good store, still worth going to. I'm happy you're supporting the local East London.
I went there like 2 years ago
industry.
when I had a grant at Queen Mary University, and it was just like in walking distance, like Rough Trade, and then walking on up there. It was a good store.
Good touch.
I think they have two branches.
There's
one in Islington as well.
Yeah, this is the Essex Road one.
I think the better one is the bigger one, more. Near Bethnal Green.
Right.
Yeah.
It used to be next door to a shop called Haggle Vinyl, which closed down a couple of years ago. And I say, actually, I'm quite happy it closed down, because the guy who worked in Haggle Vinyl was most people who work in record shops, or not most, but some people are usually quite miserable, right? And this guy was the most miserable person in the whole of the industry of selling records. So I'm kind of happy it went.
Okay.
But sad that we lost the record shop. But,
But the records won't be lost. They will always survive.
So I haven't got an African record to follow with, but I thought we
can go for something completely different.
We might as well go to Brazil, right?
Yeah, Brazil.
We promised it. Here's an artist. This is a song. As a DJ, I consider DJing. Well, you probably will say differently if you go and listen to me later on tonight. But I consider DJing my primary club DJing is my sort of number one job. Kind of in balance with being a radio broadcaster, but clubbing is still the
Time-wise or passion-wise?
I think it's an art form. It's my performance thing, which I feel is something that I keep learning, and it keeps giving me equal amounts of stress and happiness, depending on what the gig's like. There's never two gigs the same in DJing. I think if you're a band and you're with musicians, you can kind of go through an autopilot, knock it out, whether you're feeling good or bad, and still probably do a job. But when you're a DJ and you're on your own, traveling around the world, it's a lonelier existence somehow. And every time you're DJing, you know, it can be, you can have the best night in your life one night, and then the next night you can hit a brick wall. And so you're constantly struggling with that. But I love that, because it means you come back for more, because you know, that's how we are. And so this record here is a record that whenever I get to that point in the set, when I'm going, where am I? Who am I? What am I doing? Is there a point in this? Why are we all here? I need to focus. This is the record I play. And this is a Brazilian record again, and this is by Milton Nascimento, who celebrated his 75th birthday last week. And this is a song called Cravo e Canela. He did many versions of it, but this version is the sort of American crossover version. It's still amazing. And it features Herbie Hancock on piano, and it's a beauty. So I'll play that for you. Cravo e Canela.
Que temperou, cigana que temperou o cheiro do cravo. Menina que temperou, cigana que temperou a cor de canela. A lua morena dançando, vendo o ventre da noite e o sol da manhã. A chuva cigana dançando, rios, o mel do cacau e o sol da manhã. Morena que temperou, cigana que temperou o cheiro do cravo. Menina que temperou, cigana que temperou a cor de canela. The Dona Morena, the son of the woods, the taste of the cloves, cinnamon stone. The raining cigana, the dance of the rivers, the taste of the cloves, cinnamon stone.
It's got the breaks. By the way, I don't just play old records. I've only bought old records with me, though, I think, today. Have you bought any new? Oh, you bought
But
the
I wanted
Katie,
to put on an even older one, just as another. But we can go to the present times if you want. Whatever you want.
No, well,
I'll follow you.
I'm just saying, I don't have anything in here. Well, a couple of things, but I don't really have much after 2010 in here.
Doesn't matter. I think Milton Nascimento is a great example for Brazilian music as being, kind of the most sophisticated pop music I know.
Yeah.
It does have the great rhythmic work, but also the melodic and symphonic even stuff in it. And he's a great example, I think, Milton Nascimento. And I have a record here with me from '67 by Edu Lobo. And he's a crooner, a songwriter, a great songwriter, and the arrangements are just amazing. This is from 1967. I wouldn't even know how to call this music if I wouldn't know it's MPB, music, popular music from Brazil, after bossa nova, So it had become something really special, and I think it's amazing the way such a song takes you, bends and turns off and back again, and it's just high art. It's like the architecture of Brasilia. It's kind of a modernism, a very sophisticated idea of a future that didn't really come, in a way.
Chora, menino, pra comprar pitomba. Chora, menino, pra comprar pitomba. Hoje não tem dança, não tem mais menina de trança, nem cheiro de lança no ar. Hoje não tem frevo, tem gente que passa com medo e na praça ninguém pra cantar. Me lembro tanto, é tão grande a saudade que até parece verdade que o tempo ainda pode voltar. Tempo da praia, de ponta de pedra, das noites de lua, dos blocos de rua, do susto é carreira na caramboleira, do bumba meu boi. Que tempo que foi, agulha frita, munguzá, cravo e canela, serenata eu fiz pra ela cada noite de luar.
Agulha frita, munguzá, cravo e canela, serenata eu fiz pra ela cada noite de luar.
Mas hoje não tem dança, não tem mais menina de trança, nem cheiro de lança no ar. Hoje não tem frevo, tem gente que passa com medo e na praça ninguém pra cantar. Me lembro tanto, é tão grande a saudade que até parece verdade que o tempo ainda pode voltar. Tempo do corso na Rua da Aurora, é moço no passo, menina e senhora, do bonde de Olinda pra baixo e pra cima do Carmanchão. Esqueço, mas não me frevo ainda, apesar da quarta-feira, o cordão da saideira, vendo a vida se enfeitar.
Me frevo ainda, apesar da quarta-feira, o cordão da saideira, vendo a vida se enfeitar.
E frevo ainda, apesar da quarta-feira, no cordão da saideira, vendo a vida se enfeitar.
Me frevo ainda, apesar da quarta-feira, no cordão da saideira, vendo a vida se enfeitar.
E frevo ainda, apesar da quarta-feira, no cordão da saideira, vendo a vida se enfeitar.
Yeah, but this is still in a bossa nova style, but it's very sophisticated. The arrangements are really something else.
Pretty radical fade at the end there, isn't it? Those songs usually end. That was quite an interesting...
Radical fade, yeah.
Radical fade for Edu
Maybe-
Lobo. Edu Lobo's an artist that actually I've been trying to get him to come to Europe for the last 5 or 6 years because I think he's one of the greats of Brazil, not so well known outside. Weirdly enough, that music in Brazil, as I'm sure you know when you go over there, is not very popular in Brazil. I mean, it's just a certain sort of part of society gets that music. A lot of it is, when I went to Brazil the first time, I was expecting to hear all this music as I entered the city. But all I was hearing at the time, which was about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, was heavy metal. They had a massive heavy metal scene, and I was kind of a bit disappointed then. But then I kind of got it, and it also made me realize the breadth of the music industry over there, because it's not. This is a part of it, a beautiful part of it, of course, but Brazil, I was talking about African music, there's a lot more than we think. Brazilian music, man, I mean, it's just ridiculous because it was a sort of self-contained country, and a lot of the music was never exported. A few of the big names, Sergio Mendes, Milton, got released in America, but most of it wasn't. So there was this very buoyant, buzzing industry releasing shitloads of music. And so now, as a collector, whether you were looking for a kind of Brazilian take on disco, which there's a lot of, which is quite hip at the moment, or whether you're looking for the sort of more psychedelic side, of which there's loads as well. A friend of mine just put out a record the other day. I didn't realize this area existed in Brazil. I'm trying to remember the name of the record, but it was a record of just 80s electronic Brazilian music. I didn't know that existed at all. I didn't think there was a scene for that music.
The funk, what they call funk now, which is more like booty,
and
bass music.
Now, funky. But actually, on the subject of that music, I think Diplo deserves a bit of, he's getting a bit of stick at the moment because of this TV show that there is about sort of based on his career, on his ego. But he's like bigged it up. But the thing is about Diplo, whenever that subject comes up, Diplo went to Brazil and was in the favelas checking out the baile funk. He was in Cuba checking out the reggaeton. So he is a musicologist, and he deserves maximum respect for that. And it all came through for him, I suppose, to a degree with the Major Lazer project. But all of it comes back to that, and Jobim and all those people. That's the root of Brazilian music. It's amazing. Here's a Brazilian connection in a way, because and it kind of gets us into the post-punk area to a degree. Although this isn't post-punk, but this is a band that I heard. I was in a record shop in Berwick Street. There's a record shop called Paladin Records that used to be downstairs below a shop called Record Shack, and it was run by a DJ called Paul Murphy, who to me was probably, people talk about Larry Levan and they talk about David Mancuso and various people. For me, and they're obviously incredibly important, but for me, a DJ is somebody who can pull a record out which doesn't necessarily fit the easy option, and can hear a record and go, actually, that's going to drop at 2 o'clock in the morning at the club. Right, but it's different. And what Paul Murphy did is he created, like they talk about New York dance music having a kind of list of 200 classics, and all the DJs from Louis Vega to Francois K will always reference these sort of tracks. Paul Murphy did the same thing, but for a kind of for the jazz, dance, and boogie scene, and if you look at his kind of the tracks he pulled out from cheap record shops and jazz shops and record fairs, his list of records that DJs now reference is almost into the thousands. So Paul Murphy was an absolute hero and a very important figure in the alternative British club scene. Now, this isn't one of those records actually that you could play at 2 o'clock in the morning, but this is a record I remember because he had a record shop in the basement, and I remember really clearly walking down the steps. I was probably 22 years old, and I was that little really annoying kid who'd come along to his record shop and spend the whole day in the record shop not buying any records. I was the guy who was just like writing it all down, and then maybe buying one record. And they used to make fun of me. And in fact, that record shop, what they used to do, because I used to be on the pirate radio station then, and I used to do a chart called the Paladin Top 10, which was a chart based on the records they sold in his shops. Maybe I'd get a free record if I did this chart. That's why I did it. And what they did is they used to actually give me tracks on the list for the top 10 that I'd read out, and they'd give me fake names just so that they could enjoy watching me saying incorrect titles.
no.
That was their humor, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the kind of guy I was and that they were. But anyway, as I went down the steps one day in the shop, they were playing this song. And I thought, this is amazing. And this,
But what is it?
so this is a record
It looks-
by a group called Weekend. And as you can see, it's on the Rough Trade record label.
Oh, yeah, Weekend, of course.
And I
Yeah.
suppose this is the sort of same period of time as groups like Sade having success and groups like Everything But the Girl having success. And I like that music. But this was just a little bit deeper. And it's quite long, but it's...
Phil Muxham is from Young Marble Giants, I think.
He is,
Yeah.
So there's that school of, you know...
But he's on the plus list, I see. Yeah.
Extra-
He's an additional.
Yeah, for this
Yeah.
track. And this track also features the legendary British trumpeter Harry Beckett. So this is the band who
yeah.
basically brought real, authentic British jazz musicians to a kind of indie, quite cool, record label at the time. So it goes in two parts, this song, and I'll play the first part into the first bit of the second part. But this still sends shivers down my spine.
Watching passing wheels on the runway, in a hurry scurrying by. As I quietly watch from my window, they must fly. Bye, 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 bye. Roll back roofs and folded back shirt sleeves as the sun streams down from the sky. Wishing they could be somewhere else. Bye, bye, bye. Now they must fly. Have you heard that self-indulgence just isn't paid? And you cannot have enjoyment on a weekday. Sun disappears from the skies, weekend arrives.
So you know, as I was walking in the shop, I just heard the second bit of the bossa bit at the front. That was all right, but when it went off, when the trumpet went in and the percussion came in, I was going down the stairs. I was like, "This is the most incredible record I've ever heard in my life." At the time,
Yeah.
And I still and to me, this band Weekend, I mean, they were coming from punk. They were like punks,
Yeah.
post-punks, and they were beginning to get into this mixing. A sort of, you know, mixing the styles together. So, you know, big up to them.
It's recorded. I just saw it was recorded in '82, and I mean in Germany there's a word which is about the Pop Sommer 82, which is the summer of pop '82,
Right.
which means like this was a year where there was this kind of quoting, citations, almost like sampling without doing it technically, but stylistically. Like there were all these bands like Dexys Midnight Runners and so on, like blending things into each other, which you had not expected to be blended into each other. And like there, this we were just listening. Where are they moving now? You know, and it was kind of very new then.
Yeah.
Even by just not just by quoting stuff, which could have been known. You know, but maybe we didn't know it or
Yeah.
not in that context. And this is a great thing about popular music when that happens.
Yeah. I think the purists were probably making fun of it, and we were just going, "This is amazing."
But I'm not a purist, no.
Yeah, and neither am I.
I have put on a band from Munich from now, BELP, B-E-L-P, and they're doing something like kind of an elegant way of playing post-jazz or something without being cappuccino, you know what I mean? So I like what they do, BELP. Yeah. This raises the question if the speed is right, but I think it is. Let me check. No.
This could be right. It could be-
33.
No, I don't know.
45?
Maybe. Give it a go.
No. Could be both. This is always interesting when there's some new music coming up and you always go in the record store to the guy and ask him 33 or 45.
That sounded like Footwork at 45.
Yeah, but yeah. But I think they think of it as being jazz. But this is again another difficult question. But we're now on 33.
Yeah, I think it's right. Mate.
I go a little further.
I love it.
It's good, isn't it? Still, I'm sorry. Yeah, but this is also elegant, isn't it? I think it's in a minimalist way very elegant. Even if the name of the guy who does this is his regular name is Sebastian Schnitzenbaumer, Munich.
I mean, amazingly enough, we've got Mark Anestis who's here today as well, and in a way, I think he's responsible for a lot of the sort of bass sound and the sonics that have been coming out of music for many years now, and his Rhythm and Sound record label has had such a big influence, and people like Mahler in the UK, labels like Deep Medi.
I have some Deep Medi stuff in here as well, yeah.
You can see that
Post dubstep.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, great music.
And
London is a great place for that right now, I think. London is a great place for this kind of music right now. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's good.
Sorry for interrupting.
Is that a band or is that a single, one artist? Is that one?
It's one. They play like a little band, but it's mostly also electronics, but also keyboards and sometimes even saxophones.
Is that new as well?
2 years old.
Oh, that's good.
He put out quite a lot. They have a record label in Munich called Chamonix Musik. Chamonix with SCH, Chamonix Musik, yeah. Yeah, if you Google Belp, it's interesting. I think it's beautiful.
I feel bad not to have been on that.
It says 33 RPM, it says
I might
at
have
least.
to take that off you today. Thank you.
I could give it to you and ask him for another one.
If you want to do that, we'll do that. I'll take you one now.
I know the guy.
I'll give you something as well. We'll do a swap. Well, I suppose because when I did this, I suddenly thought that you asked me to bring some significant records for my career, I suppose, as well, to play with as well. And one record that I've been going back to quite a lot recently is an album that I released by Ronnie Size and Represent called New Forms, which was, in a way, our most critically successful record at Talking Loud, the label I had at the time, because it won the Mercury Prize. And it was a record that was quite ambitious because it was a double vinyl and there was so much music to go through. But every track he made at that time was just gold. And there was a little magic period going on where drum and bass needed a bit more dirt. And this collaboration of amazing people, DJ Crust and DJ Die and Sav and the MC Dynamite and Ronnie Size, they were just coming up with some pure magic at the time, which went beyond the constraints of regular drum and bass on a lot of the album. And I listened back to the first 12-inch that we released on the label, and it was a kind of precursor to the album. And on this 12-inch, there was a couple of tracks that never made the album.
Which year about?
So we're talking 97, 96, 97.
97,
I remember it was a good year.
Yeah.
Because I just joined Radio 1, I think, and my wife had our first child, and I won the Mercury Prize. So I thought, life doesn't get much better than this. I was ticking all my boxes. It was really great. Anyway, so that was a good year, and this was the 12-inch that came probably in 96 before. And on it, there was a track here, and interestingly enough, this track, we can't play all of it because it's like 12 minutes long, but there's a little drum solo bit at the end, and it was an interesting track because I spoke to Ronnie recently, Ronnie Size, and when this came out, they hadn't yet thought about doing a live band, and Represent went on to be probably the first drum and bass band to really create an incredible live show. You know, in the same way that groups like Chemical Brothers or Left Field were doing it for sort of dance music, they'd sort of come up with this incredible way of performing their music live all around the world. And I was talking to Ronnie the other day, and I said, you know, what was because there's some live drums at the end. I said, well, you weren't live yet. He says, yeah, well, what we actually did is we were on tour with you, and we were doing a tour of Germany. And it was a Talking Loud tour, and it was Ronnie Size and his band, his guys doing DJ sets with me, and Galliano were the live band, and they were an amazing live band, and it was a gig at the Muffathalle in Munich. We were playing at, and Galliano won, and the drummer did a great solo, and Ronnie Size sampled the drums without us realizing. Well, he got the tape, the live recording of Galliano, and then he put that at the end of this track. So I'll play the beginning.
From the Muffathalle?
From the Muffathalle, right. So he only just admitted that to me 20 years later, 25 years later, I think it is. So that was quite nice. And Galliano were the first kind of group on Talking Loud that were able to bring club culture, British club culture, into a live context. That was always a big struggle for us because
sure.
it was like the DJ culture, but I was always somebody who put on parties, whether it was playing at the WAG Club or whether it was Dingwalls or whether it was a lot of the parties that I would put on, I'd always try and incorporate live music with DJ culture, and that was quite rare at the time. And so with my record labels, I also wanted to try and take the music that was coming out of a club scene, but turning it into a live context. So Galliano were the first band for me that really were able to take that spirit into a live performance. Funnily enough, Ski Oakenfall, who was in the group, he's doing a panel here, so he might even be in the room. So he was in the group. But anyway, this is a track from Ronnie Size, inspired by Galliano at the end, recorded or sampled at Mufahala in Munich, called Sounds Fresh. Have a listen to this. This sounds great. I had to go to the drop, and then this is the little drum bit at the end, which is just, it just appears. It's just quite interesting. Oh, actually, no, it's on the other track. Sorry about that. No, phew! No, I wouldn't have come. Show the Fall, it's on the back of that. This bit here.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing to you the sounds of now.
So there you go. That no one knows that. I just found that out. That is Galliano with Ronnie Size.
Really good. Yeah, thank you so much, Giles Peterson. We have to come to an end because the schedule is like 1:45, and that's why I said we'll start the last record.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries.
But it was so great. I could have gone on forever.
Thank you very much,
Yes,
Thomas.
no, thank you for coming. And what else? Yeah. Giles Peterson.